You was abandoned. So tell me who Shari actually is.
Well, I know who Sherry is now. I didn't know who Sherry was for a very long time. And as you mentioned, I was abandoned. I was orphaned in South Korea and I was found in a cardboard box without any identifying information. I don't have my real birth date. And, you mentioned I traveled across the US. Part of that travel I didn't realize was finding who I am and where it feels like home.
You know, I it's funny, but I can see the image of an infant being stranded there. And luckily someone picked you up. Has anybody ever told you a little bit of the story on how you was found, who picked you up, how you got to the square one?
Yeah, there's very little records. I appreciate that you called me young lady, but this is back in 1969. There weren't very many records. Even if there were, they probably would have been lost by this point. And what I realized, this cardboard box, I found out the story by looking at my records when I was in high school. So not a great time to find out that your birthday's not your own when you're already going through all your stuff you go through as a teenager. And what I realized, though, is this box that symbolically told me that I don't belong. When I traveled across the US to share these meals with these strangers, and they were all women, I was doing this travel on my own, that I had symbolically flipped that box over and made it a table where connection and belonging were found.
And let's go deeper. How did you manage to get a family to even get started on your journey? Because you went to high school, definitely college grad. I mean, who was because of the system, you usually go through multiple families before you decide to be with the right one. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, I was adopted internationally, and I'm in the first, what they call the first wave of international adoptions. Korea was the first country to open up international adoptions following the Korean War because there are so many Amerasian and Eurasian babies from all the soldiers. And in Korea at that time, if you were a mixed race, they thought you were a second class citizen and you were basically not worthy of a full human existence. And so I was adopted by a couple here in America. While most, okay, you'll appreciate this. While most, Korean adoptees were adopted by rich white families, right? I was adopted by Japanese American families, a Japanese American couple. They were both born in the Seattle area and there was a generation between us. So they were the age of my friend's grandparents, but they had been placed in internment camps during World War II. Yeah. So while my counterparts ended up in the suburbs in these wealthy families, I ended up with, and they were wonderful parents, but parents that had been interned during World War II.
When did the realization start to take place that you don't have a biological mom, biological dad? Take me to the mind of a young girl being part of a, like you said, a wave of discrimination because American soldiers were intermingling with Vietnamese soldiers and so forth. Now you're witnessing firsthand even your own country not having nothing to do with you. And now you're coming to America. What was all that like for you? And how did you process it?
Well, I was a baby, so I don't remember all of that, but I always knew I was adopted. Even though my parents were also Asian, we looked very different from one another. And at the time, I mean, now you see older parents all the time. People wouldn't blink an eye. But back then, you didn't see parents that, have a newborn baby or not a newborn, but an infant or a toddler and they're about 50 years old. And so I always knew I was adopted and I always knew they were Japanese and I was Korean. And the thing about adopted kids is you always have to explain your existence and why you're in a family, especially if you don't look like your parents. You're explaining to strangers why you got into a family. So from a very young age, without realizing what I was doing, I was justifying why I had a family to random people, adults.
And you were creating a story at such a young age because imagine kids are curious. I mean, at the time, you probably didn't pay that no attention, but yeah, you're curious. What were some of the things that you remember that was almost the same question over and over, even as you got older?
Well, people always ask where you're from. I mean, people, and they're usually they mean well when they do that. And so I answer. I know they're not asking me if I'm from Seattle, right? So that's a question that gets asked a lot. And then now that when they find out my parents were Japanese American and I'm Korean, they're like, "How'd you guys get along?" And I'm like, "Well, those are those two countries. We didn't bring that into the house." But those are kind of the questions. People trying to wrap their minds around adoption and what's that like, and especially what's it like to not know your real birth date. That's a big one.